Take that dress off right now. We do not allow satanic clothing in this town." Her voice snapped through the community hall, loud enough to freeze every parent and child in place. She pointed at the little girl as if she were calling out a criminal, not a student wearing her art project. And the room watched as humiliation spread clean across the child's face. Then came the whispers, the lifted phones, the judgment that moves faster than truth. She kept pushing, calling the dress corrupt, calling the father irresponsible, calling the family a threat to the neighborhood. And while everyone expected an argument or a meltdown, the man simply stepped forward, calm as stone. What no one knew was that his silence was not weakness at all. It was the first crack forming beneath her authority. Because moments later, something would happen in that same building that exposed everything she had built on lies and fear. Before we reach the moment when the mayor ordered her out of the town for good, we need to see exactly how she crossed the line. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. They thought they were witnessing a dress problem. They had no idea they were witnessing the start of a collapse. He stepped into that moment slowly, not with anger, but with a calm that almost felt out of place. The girl leaned into him, trembling, and he rested a hand on her shoulder, like he was steadying both of them at once. He did not shout. He did not defend himself. He only looked at the woman who had humiliated his daughter and nodded as if he had already decided something she could not imagine. That calm was not surrender. It was the quiet of a man trained to study people, to understand patterns, to wait for the exact moment when truth becomes undeniable. It was the quiet he had learned over years of watching situations fall apart overseas. It was the quiet of someone who had been responsible for communities far more fragile than this one. And though no one in that hall knew who he had once been, they all felt the shift when he finally turned away with his daughter wrapped in his jacket. Lily clung to him the moment they stepped outside. She always tried to be strong, always tried to pretend she did not miss her mother, but the simple cruelty of being singled out in front of everyone hit her harder than she expected. He did not rush her. He let her breathe. He let her lean against him. He let her shake until she steadied, because he knew grief takes whatever shape it needs. He walked her to the truck as gently as he could, even though rage pulsed under his ribs. Not the kind that blinds people, the kind that sharpens them. He had seen enough abuse of authority in his old life to know how it grows when left unchecked. And he could already see the pattern in her behavior. It was the same arrogance he used to brief soldiers about, the kind of righteousness that makes people believe rules apply only to others. But for now he focused on Lily. He helped her climb into the truck. He handed her one of the spare sweaters he kept under the seat. He waited until she lifted her chin without trembling. Inside the cab, Lily whispered that she wished she had never made the dress. He told her the truth. The dress was beautiful. The meaning behind it was stronger, and none of this was her fault. She nodded, but he could tell she was already rehearsing what she would say the next time someone mocked her. 13 years old, and already learning how to shrink herself to avoid conflict. He would not let that continue, not in this town, not under this woman's rule, not when dignity was the only thing his daughter had left untouched. As he drove them home, the community hall shrank in the rearview mirror. But the memory of what happened inside stayed sharp. The way the crowd stared, the way the woman smirked when she saw Lily cry, the way she weaponized the rules she claimed to protect. He did not know yet where this path would end, only that he would not let his daughter carry this alone. He had spent years teaching soldiers that the smallest injustice often reveals the largest truth. And today, a dress had revealed a problem rooted deep in the town's leadership. He parked the truck outside their small home. The porch light flickered the way it always did, and Lily slipped inside to her room. He lingered on the steps a moment longer, looking back at the quiet street, replaying every detail. Not because he was dwelling on the humiliation, because he was collecting it, filing it, storing it. For the first time since he moved here, he knew trouble had found his door. But trouble underestimates a calm man. This was only the beginning, and the woman who forced a child to remove a dress in public had no idea how far this would go once he began pulling at the threads of her authority. He stood on the porch a moment longer, letting the cold settle into his hands before stepping inside. The house was dim, except for the warm lamp Lily always kept on in the living room. She'd gone straight to her room without a word, and he let her have that space. Grief and embarrassment were cousins. They hit fast and left slowly. He slipped off his jacket, hung it by the door, and listened to the quiet in the house. Quiet told him more than noise ever could. He checked on Lily, not by knocking, not by hovering, but by listening for her breath, slow, uneven, holding itself together. She'd be okay, but only if he played this carefully. She'd already lost too much in the past year. He wasn't adding public battles to her plate. Not yet. He stepped back into the kitchen and opened the drawer where he kept small, ordinary tools. Flashlights, spare screws, duct tape, nothing special. But next to them, folded too neatly to belong in a mechanic's house, sat an old notebook, a habit from his military days, one he'd sworn he'd never need again. Tonight, he pulled it out. Not to plot revenge. That wasn't who he was, but to document, to gather, to track. Abuse of power looked loud in public, but always left quiet fingerprints behind. And he'd been trained to notice those fingerprints long before most people even realized something was wrong. He wrote down the time they walked into the arts fair, the moment she confronted Lily. Her exact words, he remembered them with precision, because men like him always remembered attacks on children. He detailed the crowd, the officials present, the missing signatures on the event safety checklist. He didn't know where this would lead yet, but patterns only revealed themselves when the pieces were placed correctly. As he wrote, his phone buzzed with a notification, doorbell cam. He tapped the screen, there she was. Same posture, same clipped walk. Marjorie Hale, HOA vice president, marching onto his porch like she owned not just the neighborhood, but the air people breathed. This time she carried a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. He walked outside before she could knock. She blinked, startled that he had met her halfway. That violation notice wasn't optional, she snapped, waving the clipboard like proof of her righteousness. Your daughter's attire violated the community decency code, and your porch decor encourages antisocial behavior. We can't have that. He didn't flinch. The code you referenced was repealed 4 years ago. Her mouth tightened. Those rules were replaced with updated expectations. I enforce those expectations. You enforce fear, he replied calmly. Not rules. For a moment she seemed unsure how to respond. She wasn't expecting pushback, especially not from him, quiet mechanic, widowed father, someone she'd decided was beneath her authority. But that flicker of hesitation hardened again. You're on thin ice, she hissed. If you keep resisting, the board will take stronger measures. He didn't rise to it. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped aside. Leave the paper on the railing. I'll review it. Her chin lifted in triumph, as if he'd surrendered. She placed the paper down with stiff fingers and marched away. He watched her leave, memorizing every detail of the form she'd delivered, the outdated letterhead, the violation number that didn't align with their records, the inconsistent formatting, amateur mistakes made by someone too sure they'd never be questioned. He picked up the notice and studied it under the porch light. Sloppy, rushed. A weapon crafted by someone who cared more about winning than being correct. He scanned the barcode, dead, not linked to any legitimate notice system. She wasn't just abusing authority, she was manufacturing it. He slipped the notice into his notebook and went back inside. In the kitchen, he spread out years of HOA newsletters, everyone he'd saved to keep track of community updates for Lily's sake. He compared old codes to new ones, matching, dates and signatures. The pattern emerged within minutes. Everything she'd used to threaten him was outdated, altered, or fabricated. There it was, her weakness, not the rules, her assumption that no one would ever check them. He leaned back in his chair, letting the pieces settle. This wasn't about a dress. It wasn't even about Lily. This was a power structure built on intimidation, a structure that could crumble if the right pressure point was touched. His phone buzzed again, this time from a coworker at the shop. Heard about what happened, the message read. Sorry, man, but honestly, she's been doing this to people for years. Years, not months, years. So, it wasn't just him. Another message followed seconds later from a neighbor across the street. She's escalating. Be careful. He nodded to himself. That fear neighbors carried, fear of complaints, fines, or public shaming, was exactly what people like Marjorie thrived on. But fear worked only as long as people stayed silent. He flipped the notebook to a clean page and titled it simply, Document Everything. This wasn't anger-driven. It was preparation. He wouldn't strike first. He wouldn't shout. He wouldn't embarrass her. But he would not let her fracture Lily's confidence. Not this time. Not this town. He checked Lily's door once more, before heading back to the porch with his notebook. The air was colder now, but clarity often came with cold. He scanned the street, memorizing the pattern of cars, the lights still on, the direction Marjorie had walked. Then he locked the door behind him, slipped the notebook on the highest shelf, and whispered to himself the same sentence he'd repeated through years of training. Patterns reveal people. He knew hers. Now he'd wait for her to reveal one more. And that was when her downfall would begin. He stayed by the window long after the street went quiet, watching the spot where she had disappeared into the darkness. He wasn't expecting her to return tonight. People like Marjorie struck fast, then retreated into the safety of their authority. They relied on the echo of their own words to keep others in line. But tonight gave him something more important than retaliation. It gave him clarity. And clarity was the beginning of every downfall he had ever witnessed in his previous life. He pulled the curtains closed and moved through the house with practiced silence. Before bed, he always checked the locks, not because he feared danger, but because routine gave him control. He paused outside Lily's room. Her lamp glowed softly through the crack under the door. She was awake. He could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing through the walls. But he didn't push. Grief taught him that sometimes silence heals better than comfort. Still, before he went to his own room, he whispered through the door, "Sleep easy, we're okay." A small voice answered, "Night, Dad." It was enough. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the timeline of the day. Every word the woman had thrown at Lily, every whispered judgment, every violation she issued, every step of her march onto his porch. He cataloged it the way he once cataloged village interactions overseas, when understanding one community's dynamics could prevent conflict. He hadn't wanted that part of his life to follow him here, but trouble didn't choose the battlefield. It revealed itself wherever people abused power. By morning, the house smelled faintly of toast. Lily was already dressed, face pale but determined. She didn't bring up the dress. She didn't bring up last night. She only asked if he'd drive her to school instead of letting her take the bus. He said yes without hesitation. On the way, she stared out the window, watching the same streets where she used to feel safe. "Do you think everyone hates me now?" she asked quietly. He kept his voice steady. "No. Some people stayed silent because they were scared of her. That's not the same as hating you." "But they believed her," she murmured. "They all looked at me like I did something wrong." "That's because people forget to question things when someone loud tells them what to think." She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw the spark he feared yesterday's humiliation had extinguished. "You didn't forget," she said. He shook his head. "I never will. Not when it comes to you." At school, she hesitated before getting out. He leaned over and squeezed her hand once. She took a slow breath, nodded, and stepped out. She was strong, even if she didn't know it yet. He watched until she disappeared inside, then drove straight to the auto shop. Work gave him direction, and direction kept his thoughts sharp. Engines lined the lot, some half disassembled, others waiting for tune-ups. Nothing glamorous, but predictable in a way people rarely were. Inside, his coworker Nate glanced up. "Rough night?" He nodded. "Sort of." "She's at it again, huh?" "Seems that way." Nate wiped his hands on a rag. "Your girl okay?" "She will be." That's when Nate added, almost without thinking, "Figures they'd target the old ethics guy." He paused. "What did you call me?" Nate blinked. "Oh, you didn't tell me that was off limits. One of the vets mentioned you used to lecture officers or something. Cultural something. Said you were the guy they sent when villages got tense." He didn't answer right away. The reputation leak was unintentional, but it slid perfectly into place. Someone had talked. Not enough to reveal everything, but enough to remind him that his past didn't stay buried forever. He lifted the hood of the next car and let the memory settle. His work overseas had taught him that communities didn't collapse from chaos. They collapsed from misuse of authority. Small acts, unnoticed until suddenly they weren't. And last, Knight's violation notice had not been an isolated act. He stepped away from the car and pulled out his phone. If Marjorie had issued fabricated codes to him, she likely did the same to others. But people intimidated by power rarely compared notes. He began calling neighbors, not to accuse, not to stir conflict, but to ask simple questions. Have you gotten any violation letters recently? Do the numbers look newer or older? Was there a board signature? Did she hand deliver them or mail them? One by one, the pattern emerged. Every letter she issued personally lacked a legitimate sequence number. Every fine she threatened was based on codes removed from the books years ago. Every accusation targeted families she didn't like. A woman with authority, a woman with no oversight, a woman convinced she was untouchable. He wrote everything down carefully, noting names and dates without dragging anyone into something they weren't ready to face. People feared retaliation. He understood. Fear was the reason abusers stayed in power. But the notebook grew fuller with every conversation. Around noon, he stepped out behind the shop to breathe. The air was sharp, the kind that stung the lungs but cleared the mind. He watched the town from the alley, quiet houses, trimmed lawns, kids running past on lunch break. A peaceful place, on the surface. But peace meant nothing if built on silence. He tucked the notebook under his arm and headed back inside, already forming the outline of what needed to happen next. He wasn't going to confront her now. Confrontations only strengthened people like Marjorie. They let her twist the narrative, distort the truth, frame him as the aggressor. No, he needed precision. He needed timing. He needed her to reveal one more weakness. And she would. People like her always did. What she didn't realize was that he had already begun the quiet work of dismantling the foundation she stood on. He didn't need to shout to bring her down. He only needed the truth. And the truth was growing stronger every hour. He walked back into the shop with the notebook still tucked under his arm, feeling the weight of everything he'd gathered so far. The truth wasn't complete yet, but it had shape now, edges, direction. And direction was enough. He slipped the notebook into his locker quietly, not because he feared anyone seeing it, but because patterns became clearer when protected from unnecessary eyes. What he needed next wasn't paperwork. It was observation. After his shift ended, he drove straight to the community center, not for confrontation, but because people with authority often revealed their real selves when they felt comfortable. She was holding her weekly values meeting tonight, which was always less about values and more about fear disguised as order. He had avoided these gatherings since moving here, but tonight he needed to see her in her natural territory, surrounded by those who trusted her judgment. He parked at the edge of the lot and watched families walk inside, mothers carrying clipboards, older men in stiff jackets, a few teens dragged along for community responsibility. That phrase always meant something different depending on who said it. When she said it, it meant obedience. When he heard it, it meant danger. He waited a few minutes, then walked in. The room was arranged theater style, chairs in rows facing a podium decorated with the HOA seal. She stood behind it like a judge, tapping her stack of papers together for dramatic effect. When she saw him walk in, her eyebrow twitched, a small break in her polished demeanor. She recovered quickly and continued speaking, as if his presence didn't matter. He chose a seat near the back where he could see the room without being seen too much. He didn't bring his notebook. He didn't need it. Tonight was about watching. She began with small talk, complaints about gardening violations, noise rules, parking habits. None of it mattered. What mattered was the shift in her tone when she brought up recent concerns involving inappropriate displays. Several heads turned, searching for the target. He didn't move. She lifted a piece of paper dramatically. Last week, a student displayed attire symbolic of dark themes. Her voice lowered as if speaking of disease. And this board acted swiftly to protect our children. The crowd murmured in agreement, the kind that comes from not wanting to be the dissenting voice. Sheep behavior, he noted quietly. A single strong personality could shape a room of uncertain people. She continued, layering exaggeration over exaggeration, framing Lily's dress as a community threat, moral contamination, and warning sign. Each phrase dripped with the same theatrical disgust she had used at the fair. He watched the people around him more than her. Some nodded too quickly. Some looked confused but refused to question her. A few shifted uncomfortably. Those were the ones he focused on. Hesitation was the earliest crack in any power structure. One older woman raised her hand timidly. Was the dress really dangerous? It looked like art to me. Marjorie stiffened, then smiled the way people smile before they strike. Art can be harmful when used irresponsibly. He saw the woman shrink back, folding her purse tighter. Fear won again. He let the meeting continue, collecting more proof, not written, but psychological. Her influence wasn't grounded in rules, it was grounded in manipulation, and manipulation always left traces. When the meeting ended, people filed out quietly, some avoiding eye contact with him, some offering sympathetic smiles. He waited until the room cleared, and she remained alone at the podium, shuffling her papers. She looked up. "You're making people uncomfortable by showing up like this." He approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "I came to listen. Isn't that what meetings are for?" "You don't belong here," she snapped, abandoning her pleasant voice altogether. "This board exists for invested members, not troublemakers." "Is that what you call parents who disagree with you?" he asked. Her jaw clenched. "I call people what they earn." "And what have you earned?" His tone stayed level, but the meaning hit its mark. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think gathering signatures on old newsletters makes you clever? You think people will take your side over mine? I've run this neighborhood for years." "That's part of the problem," he said quietly. She flinched, barely noticeable, but he caught it. It was the first sign she felt pressure. The kind of pressure that made people sloppy. Before she could respond, he turned and walked out. Leaving was strategic. Letting her feel unfinished business gave him leverage. People who needed control hated loose ends. He stepped into the cool night and scanned the building. Parents were still talking near their cars. Some glanced at him, unsure whether to acknowledge him or avoid him. He gave a small nod to a father he recognized, and the man nodded back quickly, almost gratefully. A shift, small but real. He got into his truck and exhaled. He had what he needed. Proof of her influence, her manipulation, her treatment of the community as a stage she commanded. He wasn't looking for conflict. He was looking for patterns. Tonight, he found them. His phone buzzed, a message from the same coworker who had mentioned his past. Community center back exit was locked tonight. Again. He stared at the message. Again. That one word changed everything. A locked exit wasn't a mistake. It was negligence. And negligence could become danger. And danger created the moment he needed. Not because he wanted harm, but because crisis exposed truth faster than any notebook ever could. He drove home, mind sharp, posture straight. He didn't know when the moment would come, but he felt it now, close, inevitable, forming in the dark like a storm. When it arrived, she wouldn't be ready. But he would. He drove home with the same steady grip he'd used during long convoys overseas, hands calm on the wheel, mind sharper than the cold wind blowing across Briar Ridge. That one word from the message kept circling back through his head. Again. A locked exit wasn't just a violation. It was predictable behavior. And predictable behavior was the beginning of collapse. He parked outside his house, the porch light flickering like it always did, routine, stability. The opposite of what she was creating in this town. Inside, the house felt still. Lily had left her backpack by the couch and fallen asleep under a blanket she must have pulled over herself. He didn't wake her. Instead, he stepped quietly into the kitchen, pulled down the notebook he kept on the highest shelf, and placed it on the table. Tonight wasn't about emotions. Tonight was about structure. He flipped to the page titled Document Everything and added a single line beneath the others. Emergency exit, locked again, consistent pattern, potential safety hazard. He didn't need more than that yet. Patterns revealed themselves over time, not through dramatic scenes. What mattered now was gathering the threads she didn't even realize she had exposed. He sat for a long moment, listening to the subtle hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the kitchen clock, the faint sound of Lily's breathing from the living room. Noise that grounded him. Noise that reminded him he wasn't doing this for anger. He was doing this so his daughter didn't grow up afraid of people who misused the authority they'd been given. The next morning, he dropped Lily off at school. She seemed steadier today, still quiet, but not shrinking the way she had yesterday. She gave him a soft, "Bye, Dad," before stepping out. He watched her walk through the doors, her shoulders a little higher. It strengthened his resolve. He drove straight to the community center, not for confrontation, for information. The building was empty except for the janitor sweeping near the front. He'd spoken to him a few times, soft-spoken man with a limp from an old injury. "Morning," he greeted as Ethan walked in. "Morning," he replied. "Mind if I check something in the back hall?" The janitor shrugged. "Door's open. It always is." Except it wasn't, not when she held events. He walked through the main hall, the chairs from last night's meeting still scattered around. Everything looked normal, but normal was just surface. The truth lived in small details. He reached the rear corridor, scanned the overhead lights, the faded paint, the fire safety poster with outdated information. Then he tested the rear exit door. It opened easily now, unlocked, accessible, functioning exactly as it should. But he stepped closer and saw the outline of fresh scratches around the lock, tiny metal scuffs caused by frequent manual relocking, signs of someone who constantly overrode the automatic system. He knelt and examined them carefully. The scratches weren't random. They were recent, shallow, and consistent with someone locking and unlocking the door repeatedly over weeks, maybe months. He wrote a note in his phone. Lock tampering confirmed. Consistent tool pattern. Repeated misuse. As he stood, he noticed something else. An access panel on the side wall slightly crooked. Maintenance staff usually left things precise. People who cut corners did not. He pressed the panel gently. It swung open, revealing a key switch wired directly to the exit mechanism. Someone had installed a manual override that bypassed the required automatic safety release. That wasn't standard maintenance. That was deliberate control, and she had that key. He exhaled slowly. This was bigger than humiliation, bigger than petty violations. This was dangerous. If a fire broke out or smoke pooled in this corridor, people would be trapped. Children would be trapped. He took photos, clear, dated, angled to show context. Evidence didn't scream, evidence whispered, and whispered truth was harder to deny. The janitor peeked around the corner. "Everything okay?" He nodded. "Just checking something." "You hear about the door?" the janitor asked. "It gets locked whenever the big meetings happen. Don't know why. We've complained." He turned to face him. "Complain to who?" "To her. Who else?" The janitor gestured with a tired sigh. "She said it's for community order. Doesn't feel right." There it was, a reputation leak. Not dramatic, not loud, but intentional enough to form a bridge between what he suspected and what others already knew but couldn't challenge. "Thanks," he said quietly. "You've helped more than you know." He left the building with a growing sense of direction. The strategy forming in his mind wasn't about confrontation. It was about timing. He needed the right moment, one where her own negligence would stand beside his evidence. A moment the town couldn't ignore. He drove to work, letting the morning sun sharpen his thoughts. The auto shop was busy today, cars lined up and customers waiting. Nate waved him over. "You good? You look focused." "Just thinking," he answered, slipping into his coveralls. "About yesterday? And last night, and last week, and every violation she's handed out." Nate snorted. "Yeah, she's been on a power trip since forever." He paused mid-motion. Power trip. The phrase wasn't new, but today it felt heavier. If she controlled the exit for meetings, what else did she control? What else did she manipulate under the guise of order? He grabbed his toolbox and started working, but his mind wasn't on engines today. It was mapping patterns, connections, timelines, the way she moved through the neighborhood, the way people flinched when her name came up, the way she held her clipboard like a weapon. He had enough information now to understand one thing clearly. Her downfall wouldn't come from anger. It would come from exposure, calm, undeniable exposure. And he had just found the first real piece that could bring everything to light. The locked exit wasn't just a mistake, it was the beginning. By midday, the shop's noise faded into background static. He worked on an engine, but his mind stayed anchored to the scratched lock, the crooked panel, the janitor's quiet confirmation. Everything pointed to one truth. She didn't just bend rules, she rewrote them in whatever shape kept her in control. And control without accountability always led somewhere dangerous. He tightened the last bolt, wiped his hands, and stepped outside to breathe. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine from the woods edging Briar Ridge. For a moment, he let the quiet settle inside him. Clarity always came when he stepped away from noise. When he re-entered the shop, he already knew what he needed to do next. He clocked out early with Nate's confused shrug following him and drove straight home. Lily wouldn't be back for a few hours. That gave him time, uninterrupted, focused time, to dig deeper. He placed his worn notebook on the kitchen table, then gathered every HOA newsletter, code update, and community notice he'd collected since moving here. He lined them in chronological order, scanning them for inconsistencies. Most people saw newsletters as harmless paperwork, but years teaching officers to detect manipulation had taught him something different. Authority always revealed itself in patterns. The written kind were the easiest to expose. He ran his finger across the headers. Revised Community Guidelines, 2018. Safety Updates, 2019. Moral Standards Clause, 2020. That one made him pause. Moral standards wasn't standard HOA terminology. It was ideology disguised as policy. He opened it and scanned the small print. The language was vague, subjective, and designed for broad interpretation. Perfect for someone who wanted to weaponize it, and worse. No signatures from board members besides hers, no meeting date, no approval record. He wrote in his notebook, Moral Standards Clause, not legitimate, unverified, fabricated, or self-issued. He cross-referenced violation numbers she'd given him and several neighbors. Not one followed the numerical sequence from the official system. They were inflated, altered, or non-existent. She had created an entire shadow system of codes only she controlled. His pen moved fast now, connecting dots, building a framework. This wasn't just bullying. This was systemic manipulation. A rogue authority figure using the facade of order to target whoever she disliked. He leaned back in his chair and let the implications settle. He knew her type from experience. People who believed rules applied only as long as they served them. People who punished others for imagined threats, then hid behind policy when challenged. People who needed control so deeply, they forgot the burden of responsibility that came with it. He kept sorting documents until the front door opened softly. Lily stepped in, dropping her backpack onto the couch. She noticed the table covered in papers and frowned. "Are you doing homework?" He smiled. "Something like that." She approached slowly, noticing the newsletters, violation forms, old codes. "Is this about yesterday?" "It's about everything," he said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. I'm making sure you won't feel unsafe here again." Her shoulders lowered with a breath she'd been holding since yesterday. She nodded once and headed to her room, leaving him with a little more resolve than before. As the afternoon light faded, he took the next step. He pulled up the HOA website, basic, outdated, and likely untouched by anyone other than her. He compared posted rules with the physical copies he found in old newsletters. Dozens of discrepancies jumped out immediately, missing pages, altered sections, missing signatures again. He took photos of each inconsistency, labeling them by date and source. Every piece mattered, even the small ones. Evidence wasn't built from big moments. It was built from accumulating truth. By early evening, he had a full list. Fabricated codes, unapproved revisions, dozens of residents with unverifiable violations, manual tampering with an emergency exit, locked door during multiple events, a pattern of targeting families she disliked. He exhaled slowly. This was no longer suspicion. This was structure, and structure was how justice moved. A knock rattled the front door, sharp enough to break his concentration. He tucked the papers into the notebook and opened it to find his neighbor, Mr. Caro, shifting nervously on the porch. "Sorry to bother you," the older man said, gripping a folded paper. "But I think she's coming after me next." He took the paper. A violation, hand-delivered, same fake sequence number, same altered letterhead, same absence of signatures. "She said my garden gnome was spiritually inappropriate," Caro muttered. "I know it sounds silly, but she threatened a fine." "It's not silly," he said quietly. "It's a pattern." Caro looked up. "You think she's done this before?" "I know she has," he replied. "I'm gathering proof." Caro swallowed. "If you need help, or if you need people to speak up, there are more of us than you think." He nodded, a small shift, a needed one. Fear had kept everyone silent, but fear cracked when people saw someone willing to stand firm. That was the psychology of communities. Once one person spoke, others followed. When Caro left, he closed the door and stood still for a long moment. The evidence was stacking itself now. Neighbors, patterns, documents, violations, all pointing toward an inevitable confrontation. But confrontation wouldn't be loud. It would be precise. It would be public. And it would be timed exactly when her authority crumbled under its own weight. He took his notebook, flipped to a clean page, and wrote, "Preparing full file for exposure." His hand hovered before adding, "Need one more piece. Crisis will reveal weakness." He didn't hope for crisis, but he knew people who tampered with safety systems eventually created one. He closed the notebook gently. He was ready. Even if she had no idea how close her collapse had become. He stood in the quiet kitchen long after writing that final line in his notebook, listening to the pulse of the house as if it could tell him what came next. He didn't want a crisis. No decent person ever did. But people who tampered with emergency systems eventually created their own disasters. He closed the notebook, placed it back on the shelf, and let the night settle into his bones with a cold, unshakable certainty. The moment was coming. He just didn't know when. The next morning felt deceptively normal. Sunlight spilled through the curtains. Lily ate breakfast quietly, and he drove her to school the same way he always did. She seemed lighter today, offering a small smile when she stepped out of the truck. He nodded back, letting that small flicker of resilience anchor him before heading to work. By midday, Briar Ridge buzzed with chatter about the upcoming charity bake sale, a community event hosted in the same building where she'd locked the exit. People looked forward to it every year. Parents volunteered, kids baked cookies, seniors brought pies meant to outdo each other. On the surface, it was harmless tradition. Underneath, he felt the wrongness simmering. He arrived a bit early to drop off a box of donated items. The parking lot was already half full. He carried the box inside and scanned the hall automatically. Doors, exits, ventilation, crowd flow. Old habit, necessary habit. A habit that had saved lives before. Inside, the noise of laughter and chatter filled the room. Tables lined the walls with baked goods, crafts, and raffle tickets. Children darted between adults, giggling, chasing each other. At the far end of the room, she stood with her clipboard, smiling as if she were the benevolent queen of a thriving kingdom. She saw him. The smile tightened. He ignored her and walked toward the back hallway. The exit was locked again. He pressed the handle. It didn't budge. Fresh scratches gleamed under the metal plate, new ones, sharper than before. Someone had locked it this morning. He exhaled slowly. One more confirmation. One more piece of the puzzle sliding into place. He took a quiet photo with his phone, then stepped back into the main hall. Noise erupted as more families poured in. Children raced to the cookie tables. A teacher adjusted decorations near the stage. The room grew warm, not dangerously, just crowded. He positioned himself near the edge of the hall, eyes drifting between the crowd and the back corridor. Then it happened. A sharp crack sounded from behind the stage room, the unmistakable pop of an overloaded electrical outlet. His instincts snapped alive. A second later, smoke spilled under the door, thin at first, then thicker. Someone shouted. The lights flickered. A parent screamed for their child. Panic has a sound, a living sound, and he heard it ripple through the room like a wave. Adults surged toward the front doors, pulling children with them. But a group of kids had been playing in the back corridor, and now smoke filled it rapidly. The closest exit, the one she always locked, stood sealed shut. He moved before he even finished processing the thought. He rushed toward the hallway, shoving through the crowd. Lily wasn't here today, but other people's children were, and a crisis didn't care. Whose kids were whose? Smoke thickened fast, slithering toward the main hall. He covered his nose and stepped inside the back corridor, heat crawling along the ceiling, visibility shrinking with every breath. Half a dozen children huddled near the locked exit, coughing, crying, clawing at the handle. "We can't get out!" one boy cried. "It's okay," he said, voice steady, tone controlled. "Follow me." He herded them away from the smoke pocket forming near the ceiling, ushering them toward the maintenance corridor he had scouted 2 days ago. Behind him, the main hall devolved into chaos, shouts, alarms, useless orders from people who had never prepared for emergencies. But he tuned it all out. Clarity sharpened everything. He reached the access hatch and pried it open with a maintenance tool he grabbed off a shelf. It groaned, then gave way. Cool air swept through the space, mixing with smoke and creating a narrow path upward. "Through here," he instructed, guiding each child into the narrow passage. "One at a time. Keep low." The children crawled through, emerging on the other side of the building, where a janitor had already opened the exterior service door. Relief spread across their faces as fresh air hit their lungs. Only when the last child was safe did he step out himself, coughing hard but steadying quickly. Parents rushed over, some crying, some grabbing their children with shaking hands. A small crowd formed around him, voices thanking him, hands touching his arm, eyes full of disbelief. Then she appeared. Her face drained of color when she saw the children emerging from the maintenance exit instead of the back door. She scanned the wall, then his soot-streaked sleeve, then the children clinging to their parents. "What happened?" she demanded. He met her gaze calmly. "Your locked exit trapped children during a smoke event." "That's impossible," she snapped. "That door was secured for safety." "You tampered with it," he said simply. People heard him, parents turned. The janitor stepped forward. The shift happened right there. Silent, small, but powerful. A ripple of realization across the faces of the crowd. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not of him, of the truth. Of the moment she could no longer control. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to accuse her again. The smoke-filled corridor had done that for him. The crisis had arrived, and it had revealed exactly what he'd been waiting for. The crowd's attention shifted like a tide, slow at first, then all at once. Parents gathered closer, their children clinging to them with tear-streaked faces. Some stared at him with stunned gratitude. Others stared at her with dawning realization. The smoke still drifted from the back of the building, the scent of burnt wiring lingering in the air. He stood calmly in the middle of it, not triumphant, not angry, just steady. The way he'd been trained to be when everything around him tilted into chaos. She backed up a half step, her fingers twisting the clipboard she always carried like armor. "Everyone needs to calm down," she insisted, raising her voice to reclaim the authority slipping from her grasp. "The situation is being exaggerated. The children panicked, that's all." A mother rounded on her, shaking. "My son couldn't breathe. He was banging on that locked door, panicked. He could have passed out." "It wasn't locked," she snapped. It was locked," he interrupted, voice level but unmistakable. "I tested it before the event. The lock showed fresh scratches this morning. I saw them myself." The crowd murmured. Parents exchanged looks. The janitor stepped forward, wringing his hands. "I told her it wasn't safe. I told her weeks ago." Her face twisted. "You're lying." He met her glare with an unflinching one of his own. "The override panel was tampered with. There's a manual key switch connected to the exit mechanism. Anyone with the key could lock it. Conveniently, only one person carries that key." She looked at him like she wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "You're accusing me of endangering children? Really? You're the outsider here. You're the one with the odd behavior, the strange notes." "The strange notes?" a father echoed. "You've been collecting information on him?" The panic in her eyes flickered again. She had overstepped. She knew it, and the crowd sensed it too. Before she could gather her defense, a siren wail echoed from down the street. The volunteer fire truck rolled into the parking lot, lights flashing. The fire marshal stepped out, taking in the smoke, the anxious crowd, the narrow escape. He asked quick questions: where the smoke started, who got the children out, what triggered the alarm. Half a dozen parents pointed to him. The crowd parted as the marshal approached. "You the one who got the kids out?" the marshal asked. "Yes." "You act pretty fast for someone caught in the middle of it." "Habit," he replied. The marshal nodded, then looked toward the back corridor. "Emergency exit didn't open?" "It was locked," he said plainly. "That's illegal," the marshal muttered, already heading toward the back hallway. She scrambled forward. "You don't understand? That exit causes problems during events. Teenagers sneak around." The marshal cut her off sharply. "You do not lock an emergency exit, ever." His voice carried through the parking lot. Heads snapped toward her. Parents stiffened. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was safety. children, law. She opened her mouth again, but no one was listening. The marshal returned moments later, shaking his head. The lock's been tampered with. Someone installed a manual override. If this smoke had gotten worse, we'd be dealing with more than a scare. We'd be pulling bodies out. Silence fell. Cold, heavy silence. Then, for the first time, she lost her composure. He set me up. He's been after me since the dress incident. He's manipulating all of you. He exhaled a slow, tired breath. You locked a door. I just opened another one. The wording landed exactly as he meant it. A simple truth, not an accusation. But truth had weight, and it settled across the crowd like a final verdict. A reporter from the local paper, who had quietly arrived after hearing the alarms, stepped forward. She'd been filming, recording, documenting, the perfect witness. "Sir," she said to him, "can I ask your name?" He shook his head slightly. "I'm not the story." "But he saved the kids," one parent shouted. "That's not news," he replied. "It's what any decent person would have done." "No," the marshal said firmly. "It's what a trained person would have done." That drew more eyes, curious ones. He felt the old instinct to withdraw, to keep his past tucked behind the walls he'd built when he moved here. But he didn't say more. Not yet. This wasn't his moment. It was hers. The marshal faced the reporter. "You want a statement? Here it is. This town avoided a tragedy today, and someone in authority almost caused it." She froze. The clipboard trembled in her hands. "You'll be answering for this," the marshal continued. "There will be an investigation. Expect a call from the mayor." The mayor. Her knees nearly buckled. He watched the scene unfold with that same calm steadiness he'd carried from the first moment she humiliated his daughter. Not pride, just clarity. This wasn't the end, but it was the tipping point. The crowd slowly dispersed, children bundled into cars, parents whispering fiercely to one another. The reporter stayed. The marshal returned to his truck. The janitor muttered a quick thanks before shuffling off. He finally turned toward his own truck when she called after him, voice shrill with desperation. "You think this makes you a hero? You think you can turn this town against me?" He paused, then faced her. "I didn't turn the town against you," he said. "You did that yourself." He got into his truck, started the engine, and drove away, leaving her standing alone in the cold parking lot, the smoke still drifting through the air like the last remnants of her control. The crisis had cracked her armor. Now came the part where truth finished the job. He drove home without turning on the radio, letting the rhythm of the road steady everything inside him. The crisis had cracked open what he always knew about her, but now the town had seen it too. Not through gossip, not through quiet complaint, through undeniable danger witnessed by dozens of parents who would remember the fear on their children's faces for the rest of their lives. Exposure like that didn't fade. It spread. By the time he pulled into the driveway, dusk had settled over. Briar Ridge. The porch light flickered its tired pulse, and Lily opened the door before he even reached it. She didn't rush him. She just looked up, her eyes searching his face. He knelt so she could see him clearly. "You're okay?" she whispered. He nodded. "And the kids are okay, too." Relief washed through her, softening her shoulders. She leaned into him, and he held her for a long moment, long enough to let her know the world still made sense, even when people tried to twist it. They ate dinner quietly. Lily talked about a school art project, and he listened, letting her voice wash away the last residue of smoke clinging to his thoughts. When she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table again, opening the notebook with deliberate calm. The crisis had happened. Now came the part that mattered most, assembling truth into something the town couldn't ignore. He wrote, "Smoke incident, confirmed, children trapped due to locked exit, multiple witnesses, fire marshal involved, investigation pending." Then he added the detail that mattered most strategically. Community's emotional shift detected, fear replaced with anger, anger replaced with clarity. People who were afraid yesterday were already questioning her today. He didn't need revenge, he needed accountability. The next morning, Briar Ridge buzzed like a hive shaken from sleep. Parents posted online about the incident, angry and detailed. Neighbors whispered in driveways. The reporter's video had begun circulating, short clips of smoke pouring from the building, children coughing, and him guiding them through the maintenance corridor, and footage showing her shouting defensively at the fire marshal. It didn't take long for his phone to vibrate with a number he recognized, the mayor's office. He answered calmly. "This is Ethan." "Mr. Ward," the mayor said, voice tight, concerned. "I need you to come in this afternoon. There are questions." "I'm available," he said. He hung up, unsurprised. The mayor wasn't calling because of the dress incident or the violations. He was calling because a locked exit almost turned into a tragedy, because the town's children had been at risk, because accountability mattered more when the stakes became life or death. At work, Nate met him at the shop entrance. "Man, I saw the video. You just walked into smoke like it was nothing." He shrugged. "Someone had to." "That's not normal," Nate muttered. "That's training." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Throughout the morning, people came by the shop, parents thanking him, neighbors sharing their own grievances, a few confessing they'd wanted to speak up against her for years. He listened without judgment, adding their concerns to the mental map forming in his head. The community's fear was unraveling, replaced by something far more powerful: willingness to speak. By early afternoon, he walked into the mayor's office. The secretary nodded quickly, ushering him through the door without the usual delay. The mayor stood behind his desk, looking like a man who hadn't slept. "Thank you for coming," the mayor said. "This situation is worse than I realized." He said nothing, letting the mayor speak first. Silence always revealed the truth faster. The mayor sighed heavily. "The fire marshal sent a report. The exit was locked, tampered with. Witnesses confirmed you got the children out. Parents are demanding answers. And Marjorie claims she locked it for safety." He lifted an eyebrow. "Safety from what?" "She wouldn't say." He rubbed his forehead. "Look, I need facts, not politics. If you have information—" He gestured toward the empty chair. "Please sit." He placed his notebook on the desk, opened it, and slid several pages forward. Chronological, clean, precise. He spoke calmly, the same way he had once delivered situation briefings to commanders who needed clarity more than emotion. He showed the mayor the fabricated violation codes, the altered moral standards clause, the witnesses who received unapproved notices, the janitor's statement, the photos of the scratched lock, the hidden manual override panel, the pattern of her behavior going back months. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He simply presented truth in its rawest form. The mayor's expression shifted from concern to shock to disbelief to quiet, simmering anger. When the last piece of evidence slid across the desk, he closed his eyes for a long moment. "This isn't just negligence," the mayor said. "This is abuse of authority. This is endangerment. This is grounds for removal." He nodded once. "That's why I documented it." The mayor exhaled through clenched teeth. "I'm calling an emergency community hearing tomorrow. I'll ask the fire marshal to attend, and I want you present. The town needs to hear this from someone who isn't afraid to speak." He shook his head. "This isn't about me." "No," the mayor said firmly. "It's about your daughter, and every family she's punished. They need someone steady, someone who can present truth without turning it into a war." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come." When he left the office, the town looked different, not physically, but in mood. Windows opened, neighbors talked openly. Eyes that once glanced away from conflict now met one another with shared understanding. The tide had turned. The crisis had revealed her weakness. Now the truth would dismantle the rest. The walk from the mayor's office to the truck felt different this time, lighter somehow, though his steps stayed steady. The town no longer looked like a maze of quiet houses and trimmed hedges. It looked like a place waking up. Doors open, people talking. No one pretending they hadn't seen what happened at the bake sale. The truth had slipped into every street and porch. Conversation, and once truth spread, fear had nowhere left to stick. He climbed into the truck and sat for a moment with the engine off. He didn't allow himself pride. This wasn't victory, not yet. It was preparation, the careful alignment of truth before it met the public. And tomorrow's emergency hearing would expose everything, quietly, cleanly, and without theatrics. Exactly the way justice should operate. He turned the key and drove home. Inside, Lily was in the living room doodling in her sketchbook. She looked up quickly, scanning his face the way children do when they want to know if the storm outside has passed. "How was the meeting?" she asked softly. "Important," he said. "The mayor's taking action." Her eyes widened. Because of what happened, and because of what she's been doing for a long time, he replied. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. There was something steadier in her posture today, a sense that she wasn't shrinking anymore. That mattered more to him than anything else. After dinner, he sat at the kitchen table again, spreading out the documents one more time, not because he doubted the evidence, but because precision mattered. The timeline needed to be airtight, the explanation simple, the truth undeniable even to those who wanted to look away. He organized everything by category. Fabricated violation notices, altered community codes, residents' testimonies, photographs of tampered locks, the janitor's account, fire marshal's findings, video timestamps. He scanned each page, confirming every detail, every date, every pattern. Then he rehearsed, not words, but clarity. How to present without anger, how to stay calm when the room grew loud, how to let truth speak louder than accusation. By the time he finished, the house was quiet. Lily had gone to bed, and the night hummed through the walls. He gathered everything into a single folder and placed it beside the front door. Ready. Morning came with a cold breeze and a sky the color of steel. He dropped Lily at school with a reassuring nod. She squeezed his hand before getting out, and then headed straight to the town hall. People already filled the parking lot. Groups whispered in low tones. Some held printed copies of the video. Some held notes. Some stood with arms crossed, faces tight with anger that had nowhere left to hide. Inside, the room was arranged with folding chairs facing a raised platform. The mayor sat at the center, the fire marshal on one side, a few board members on the other. The reporter with the camera took a seat near the front, and there she was, already sitting stiffly at a reserved table, face powdered, lips tight, hands gripping her clipboard so hard her knuckles looked bloodless. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but the seats around her stayed empty. He didn't approach her. He didn't look at her longer than a breath. He took a seat in the second. Rowe laid the folder on his lap and waited. The mayor called the hearing to order. "We're here today," he began, "to address serious concerns about safety violations, misuse of authority, and the events that occurred during the charity bake sale." Her chair creaked as she straightened. "I'd like to state—" "You'll speak when recognized," the mayor said sharply. A murmur rippled through the room. The mayor turned toward the fire marshal. "Please begin with your report." The marshal stood, adjusting his hat. On the day of the event, the rear emergency exit was locked, manually overridden with a key switch not part of the original safety infrastructure. Children were trapped. Had the smoke spread, we'd be discussing fatalities. Her voice shot out like a knife. "That's a gross exaggeration." "Sit down," the mayor snapped. Gasps followed. She sat. The marshal continued. "Someone installed an unauthorized lock mechanism. Someone with exclusive access. Someone who overrode multiple safety codes." Silence choked the room. Then the mayor looked at him. "Mr. Ward, please come forward." He rose steadily, walked to the podium, and opened the folder. He didn't clear his throat or look around. He began the same way he used to brief officers. Straight facts, no dramatic pauses. He presented the fabricated violation codes, the altered documents, the missing signatures, the tampered lock photos, the witness statements, the janitor's recollection, the timeline of harassment, the pattern of selective enforcement, the video of children gasping for air. Every detail placed gently but firmly into the room until it felt full of truth, full of clarity, full of the weight of her actions. She finally broke. "He hates me. He's twisting things. He's manipulating all of you." He met her eyes once, calmly. "I don't hate you. I barely know you." That landed harder than shouting ever could. The mayor looked at the board members. "We have more than enough evidence." People in the room nodded. Some whispered angrily. Some folded their arms. Some stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The mayor raised his gavel. "This town cannot be governed by fear, deception, or endangerment, effective immediately." Her breath hitched. "You are removed from the HOA board, permanently." Another breath. "And barred from holding any administrative or leadership position within Briar Ridge." Then the final blow. "You are banned from all community events and buildings pending further legal review." A collective exhale swept the room. She sank into her chair, stunned. No clipboard could protect her now. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet. Precise justice. Exactly the victory he'd been building toward. He stepped away from the podium, the weight on his shoulders finally easing. Tomorrow, he would show Lily what dignity looked like when truth stood its ground. He stepped out of the town hall with the folder still tucked under his arm, though it no longer felt heavy. The air outside was crisp, the kind that woke a person straight to the bone. People followed him out slowly, clustering in small groups, murmuring in tones tinged with relief, shock, and something else he hadn't heard in weeks. Gratitude without fear attached to it. Some nodded to him silently as they passed. Some put a hand over their heart. Others simply looked at him with the kind of respect that didn't need words. He didn't linger. He never had interest in becoming the center of anything. He just took a long breath and walked toward his truck, ready to get home before Lily returned from school. She needed the calm of normalcy far more than he needed recognition. He had almost touched the door handle when someone called his name. "Ethan, wait, please." He turned. The mayor jogged toward him, loosening his tie as he approached. The man looked less like a leader and more like someone trying to catch up with consequences he should have seen coming earlier. "You handled yourself better than most elected officials I know," the mayor said. "The way you presented everything, it left no room for doubt." "I didn't want doubt," he replied. "Not when children were involved." The mayor nodded. "I contacted the fire marshal to initiate a formal review. There will likely be legal repercussions." "Do whatever keeps the community safe," he said simply. The mayor hesitated. "You know, she's been in power for a long time. People followed her because they felt they had no choice. What you did, standing up like that, it gives this town a chance to reset." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The mayor clapped his shoulder in gratitude and headed back to the building, leaving him alone again by his truck. He drove home quietly, the engine's hum steady beneath him. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw Lily sitting on the porch steps with her sketchbook, legs folded underneath her. The moment she spotted him, her face brightened. "You're back early," she called. He sat beside her. "Town meeting ended sooner than I thought." She closed her sketchbook, studying him. "Did something big happen?" "A few things," he said with a small smile. "Some of the truth finally came out." "Because of the kids at the bake sale?" "And because of everything she did before that," he replied. "People finally saw it." Lily's expression shifted, her jaw tightening. "Good. She made everyone scared, even the grown-ups." He looked at her carefully. "And how do you feel?" She paused longer this time. "Like, maybe it wasn't my fault." He reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. "It was never your fault." She leaned against him for a moment before pulling away with a deep breath. "Can we go by the art room tomorrow? I think I want to finish the dress project. I don't want it to feel ruined anymore." He smiled softly. "Yeah, we can." That small request meant more than any thank you he could have received today. It meant she was reclaiming something, rebuilding something that had been shaken, but not broken. The rest of the evening passed quietly. He cooked dinner while Lily painted. The house felt warmer, lighter, like the tension that had been sitting in the corners had finally loosened its grip. After dinner, Lily went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional weight of the past week. He returned to the kitchen table, notebook in hand, not because he needed to document more, but because he wanted to close this chapter cleanly. He wrote a final line under the timeline: "Public exposure complete, justice initiated." He closed the notebook, letting his hand rest on the cover for a moment. He thought about the life he had left behind: briefings in desert heat, negotiations in tense villages, guiding officers through situations where one wrong move could cost lives. He hadn't wanted any of that to follow him here. He came to Briar Ridge to give Lily a softer world, but softness meant nothing if it allowed harm. A knock at the door pulled him out of his thoughts. He opened it to find two neighbors standing awkwardly on the porch, Mr. Caro and a woman from down the street he'd only spoken to once. "Sorry to show up unannounced," Caro said. "We just wanted to thank you." The woman nodded. "We all saw what you did today, what you've been doing quietly. If you ever need anything, this street is here for you." He nodded. "I appreciate that." Caro hesitated. "Truth is, we've all been scared of her for years. You weren't." "I was," he said honestly. "I just didn't let it decide what I did next." They exchanged a look, then thanked him again before returning to their homes. As he closed the door, he realized something subtle but important. Fear had lost its place in this neighborhood. And once fear lost its roots, bullies lost their power. He stepped outside again later, needing a breath of the cool night air. The porch light flickered as usual, but tonight it felt like a familiar comfort rather than a reminder of things left unfixed. The street was quiet, peaceful, honest. He leaned against the railing and looked toward the community center's roof just visible in the distance. He wondered what she was doing now, packing up her clipboard, blaming everyone except herself, struggling to understand how her authority had slipped through her fingers in a single day. But he didn't feel pity, just closure. Because justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was simply the truth being seen in daylight. And for the first time since the humiliation at the arts fair, he felt the world tilt back toward balance. Tomorrow, everything would begin to settle. But tonight, the town was finally breathing again. The night air felt clean in a way it hadn't in weeks, as if the entire town had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. He stayed on the porch a little longer, hands resting on the railing, watching the empty street where fear used to walk so boldly. Now it was just quiet, honest, settled. He didn't know if peace would last forever, but tonight it felt real enough to believe in. He stepped back inside and checked on Lily. She slept curled beneath her blankets, sketchbook open beside her pillow. A half-finished drawing of the black dress lay on the page, delicate, thoughtful, no shame in its lines. He brushed a hand gently through her hair, switched off the lamp, and eased the door closed. This was why he fought carefully, precisely, without noise. So she could sleep without fear, so she could grow up believing dignity wasn't something that could be taken by loud voices. The next morning arrived soft and slow. Birds scattered across the porch rail, and sunlight slipped gently across the living room floor. Lily padded into the kitchen barefoot, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Can we go to the community center after school?" she asked. "I want to finish the dress display." He smiled. "Yeah, we can." She nodded, confidence returning to her posture, the kind that had been chipped away by humiliation, but not destroyed. Resilience grew quietly like that, rooted in the small moments where the world stopped being cruel long enough to let someone stand again. After dropping her at school, he drove past the town hall. A small crowd had gathered around a posted notice, official, stamped, precise. The mayor's signature glinted at the bottom. He didn't have to get out to know what it said. Word had already begun spreading across the neighborhood last night, carried from porch to porch with a mixture of shock and relief. Effective immediately, Marjorie Hale is prohibited from participating in, overseeing, or attending any community, leadership, or governance event within Briar Ridge. Further legal review pending. It was done. He drove to the auto shop, where Nate greeted him with a low whistle. "You see the announcement?" "I saw." "She's furious," Nate said. "Packed up her office at the HOA building before sunrise. Someone said she was crying." He paused before replying. "Consequences aren't supposed to be pleasant." "And she earned every one of them," Nate added. "People are actually smiling today. That's new." He got to work, letting the familiar rhythm of tools and engines settle into his hands. Patterns, movement, focus. Work grounded him the same way truth did. He didn't need applause or attention. His satisfaction came from knowing the community was safer than it had been yesterday. Around mid-afternoon, the reporter from the bake sale incident stopped by the shop. She held her notebook close to her chest. "I'm doing a follow-up piece," she said. "Parents are calling you a hero." "I'm not," he answered simply. "Maybe not to yourself," she replied, "but you're the reason those kids made it out." He didn't argue. He just nodded once, then returned to the engine he'd been working on. She took the hint and left quietly, leaving him with the steady clink of metal and the calm he preferred. That evening, after school, he and Lily walked together to the community center. The hall was quiet, the smell of smoke gone, replaced by the faint scent of fresh paint. The maintenance crew had repaired the hallway, removed the illegal override panel, and replaced the damaged wiring. Lily carried her sketchbook under her arm. When she reached the display board near the entrance, she paused. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from significance. He watched her open the sketchbook, remove the finished drawing of the dress, and pin it carefully beside the blank spot left after the incident. Her voice wavered, but didn't break. I want people to see it, not because of her, because it was supposed to be here. He rested a hand on her shoulder. Then it belongs here. She stood back and looked at the display. For the first time since that awful day, she seemed proud again. Shoulders lifted, chin higher, eyes clear. A couple of neighbors entered the hall and stopped when they saw the drawing. One of them smiled at Lily. "That's beautiful," she said warmly. "You should be proud." Lily nodded, cheeks pink with shy confidence. "Thank you." They walked home together slowly, letting the quiet settle between them. When they reached the porch, Lily slipped inside, while he stayed out a moment longer, watching the neighborhood he'd fought for. Not with force, not with aggression, but with truth. He thought of the notebook on his shelf, now closed. He thought of the locked exit, the smoke, the panic, the calm precision that followed. He thought of Lily's shrinking posture at the fair and her steady one today. That, more than the mayor's ruling, was the real victory. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it rebuilt, and sometimes it looked like a child pinning her artwork back where it belonged. He stepped inside, letting the door close behind him, the night settling gently around their home. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?